Hey, Joshua, I am bringing in the YouTube audience. I'm sorry, I got on a roll there and just got busy. So,
I figured
welcome.
it was about
Welcome.
that time.
Yeah, that's right. That's all right. So, welcome
Hope everybody's
everyone.
doing good.
Yeah, I do too. Forgive me for that little oversight. All right, Joshua, tell me what's on your mind, brother.
Well, so I have a takeaway. Every time we read through these passages, I always wonder, why was it so important for the sources that we have in the Exodus to make this big deal, include this story about the elders seeing God? We don't have that in Deuteronomy,
Yeah,
and I've thought about this quite a bit. I mean, and I understand that's human nature, but with all the other texts and information that we have from these ancient sources, that one, it sticks out like a sore thumb for me. I
yeah,
personally don't believe it. I've struggled with it most of my life. Um, just, just like everybody else, I came from a fundamentalist background too. I mean, we practically all did,
yeah.
and you can't make that work. So while we're going through the study this morning, this idea popped in my head, and I'd like to hear your thoughts about it. This is a large group of people at Horeb, and even if it were only 10,000 people, if you had people on one side of the camp hear Moses, kind of trying to figure out what's going on, and maybe they had a family tradition of sacrifice, and maybe you had everybody on the other side of the camp, maybe they had a different interpretation or just heard it differently. And over time, those two ideas began to compete. And I don't think it was 10,000 people. I think it was a lot more.
Yeah.
The Bible says it was over a million with their wives and children. I think it was a big number of people. But even if it weren't, you're still talking about an encampment. You may have people hearing different things and interpreting things that maybe the original author didn't intend. Does that make sense?
Mm-hmm.
So just an idea.
Well, you're right. And first of all, I've often said, and I'll say it again, I am so thankful for my background and for falling in love with the Bible in fundamentalist church. I mean, that's the reason I do what I do, because I fell in love with the biblical stories a
I
long
feel the
time
same
ago.
way.
So it's not something that I'm ashamed of or I look back on. In fact, more often than not, I find myself wanting to defend some of the fundamentalist Christian views
Yeah,
that I may not embrace, that I see people making fun of, and I just think, I mean, people have
I
to,
agree.
I
They're
mean,
they're
come on,
foundational layers of the things that have led us to this point where we are, where we have the freedom to ask questions. Um, I find myself defending some of those fundamentalist ideas also, or at least wanting to.
yeah.
But I do question my own understanding sometimes. I'm like, am I trying to make this fit because of something I used to believe or something my granddad used to believe, or am I trying to be honest with the text?
But your point about the account in Exodus and the account in Deuteronomy, they are different sources. They're different accounts. They're from different hands. And I used to say that more reservedly. Like I would say, well, we think maybe these are different accounts. We believe that these might be different sources, but there's just no doubt in my mind anymore.
Right, me too.
It's simply a fact. Now, the question then that we still have to answer is, what does that mean? What is the impetus? What drives a certain author to record certain details or to leave them out? And the reason that I brought in the story of David today, where David with Bathsheba, it's striking only if you have the account in Samuel. In other words, if I don't read 2 Samuel 11, no one can read that story and not like say, "Oh my goodness. This is really shocking." Again, think of the worst scandals of any president, and I am not getting political. I don't care your affiliations. Please don't go there. My point is, take any celebrity or any politician and you put that scandal on Fox or CNN. I mean, there would be people,
It's going to be the
doing
hallmark of their career.
shame, 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 you dirty scoundrel. And
And
yet,
everybody's going to remember it.
that's right. But Chronicles just skips the whole story. I mean, let's just not talk about it. And again, the only reason we know that is because the writer of Samuel, that source, gave us the details. We see similar things in the biblical narratives, and we see additions and deletions that are obvious because we have these different sources. So one proposal is that this flinging of the blood on the people and all that is a later priestly addition. That's the view that I take. And I said something the other night with Jono on the show that we did on Mishpatim, because he got into this. He was really talking about this idea of the splashing the blood on the people. And what I said was, but again, imagine the number of the people. I mean, if you go with the biblical number, then, if you go with the standard traditional, it's 2.7 million people. It's not like everybody got tons of blood on them. It would only be, it's like going to SeaWorld is what I said. It's only that front row. And I didn't mean that disrespectful, but that's true. It's like if you're in that front row, you might get a little bit on you. But that the back, that's like the backside of Chicago.
Right.
It's that big. No, that didn't. So what's the purpose in that story? And is that the way we should think of the covenant, is that it requires something to be killed and their blood to be flung on you? Anyway,
It seems to me like that the sources that keep hammering on the necessity for having sacrifices, they keep wanting to put it in there to make it seem like it's necessary. And another thing I thought about was, I think a lot of our fundamentalist fear comes from really early in the story of Genesis, where we have this conflict between Cain and Abel.
Yeah.
Abel was the one doing the sacrifices.
Yeah.
The story seems to indicate that Cain wasn't killing animals.
Yeah.
What do you do with that?
Yeah. Yeah. He was weak in the faith. He only ate vegetables.
Right.
Yeah, it's a strange thing, but what we do seem to see, and a lot of people say, well, Ross, like you just mentioned, this goes all the way back to the Genesis stories. Well, just because something occurs first in the biblical account doesn't mean it's the earliest or the oldest, too. That's the other thing. So we have evidence, very clear evidence, that the Bible as we have it is heavily interpolated. It is edited. It is an edited work. And I know it makes some people nervous, but it's a fact. Like we've got Genesis chapter 4, verse 26, then men began to call upon the name Jehovah. And then, you have Jehovah from Genesis 2, verse 4, all the way through. But when you look at the story in Exodus chapter 6, God tells Moses, according to Exodus chapter 6, by my name Jehovah I wasn't known. Again, the fundamentalist says, well, that can't say that because we have other occurrences of Jehovah, so it can't say that. And you say, yes, it's what it says. And what I often find people do is they look for a translation that fits their theology, so that they can, believe what they want to believe. And I think that's the wrong approach. We ought to be digging deep to discover, what does it really mean? What's the real truth here?
I agree.
And
as far as trying to reconcile some of the more difficult texts, again, back to the idea of they really wanted the elders to be able to go up there and have a meal with God.
Yeah.
But we have these other texts that says that you didn't see anything, you only heard a voice.
Yeah.
So I'd like to reconcile that a little more as far as what was the intention of the author that insists that the elders got to go have a meal with God.
Yeah, look, these make for some great discussions and certainly some good ideas for YouTube videos. Can you see God or can you not? And then you take the two different views, and there are quite a few views, quite a few texts in the Bible that says you can't see God. And then you have others where God speaks to Moses face to face as a man speaks to his neighbor or whatever.
Yeah, that's a
Uh,
tough.
how do you,
Personally,
you know,
I, I think it defeats the purpose of the Tetragrammaton. If you have the Elohim Elyon, the highest force in the universe, the force of all forces. How do you put a name on that? If you did put a name on that, you would limit God. And then we have the Tetragrammaton that says, I've always been, I always will be, and I will what I will.
yeah.
If you tried to put that into an anthropomorphic physical form, it would do a disservice to the faith, but it would also do a disservice to the very idea of God in general.
Yeah.
So I don't know. I don't know how to answer that.
Well, I tell you, this is called job security. It keeps us in the business of looking for answers. I mean, if it was all easy to solve, then we could just log into a certain YouTube channel, learn all the answers, and never have to do any researching ourselves.
That's fair. That's very good, Ross.
Hey, man, I appreciate you. Tell Dr. Ruth I said, hey.
I sure will. Thank you, sir.
All right, brother. Come on back up if you think of something else.
Sure will.
Angel and Todd, how are you, my friends?
Shabbat shalom.
Shabbat shalom.
Good to see you up and kicking.
Oh, yeah, I'm alive and well. I had people cover for me, and Seth did more work even than he normally does just to cover for me. And the only thing I had to push was Thursday night. I was supposed to record a show with Jono, and that's been postponed. So I just couldn't get out of bed. I was being lazy. So.
Well, Seth said during the class that you were healthy as a horse, and I commented back and said, well, even horses get sick.
Yeah, I was like a good sick horse, I think.
A good sick horse.
Oh, man. What you guys thinking about today?
Well, kind of adding into the conversation is, probably the best way to put it is a lot of that stuff that you read in the Tanakh is you got to take with a grain of salt. Because we don't know everything that's been added. And of course, I'm with you as far as sacrifices. They're not commanded.
Yeah.
Not by Yehovah.
Yeah, well, yeah, not by him.
Yeah.
Because that kind of goes against the grain.
It goes against his character.
Yeah, the whole thing revolves around his character. What do you think he's like? And if you're reading something that doesn't quite add up, that's not from him. I mean, just like you read earlier, I gave 10 words and no more.
Yeah. And do you guys find also that whenever you have a tension in the text, like sacrifices is what, really stirs people up. But that's one we could talk about. But if I say, here's a text which is clearly advocating, bring your sacrifices, do this, I love it. And then another text that says, I never asked for this, I want loving kindness, velozivak, and not sacrifice, something like that. When you see those differences, what most people do is they try, and I get this, they try to make sense of keeping them both in the text. So what they'll usually do, I've heard this a gajillion times, if that's really a number, where people say, well, he wants your sacrifice if your heart is right. In other words, once your heart is right, then he really wants you to do this. And that's when it all makes sense. And you go, well, it's been 2,000 years, and don't you think if God wanted them that this could be a thing? Anyway, but what happens is people, what they'll do is they won't allow me to have an opinion that is a later addition. But, so they'll challenge me with, well, what about Ezekiel 40 through 48? Have you not read? Like, I haven't read that. And if I say, well, what do you do with Hosea 6:6 or Micah 6 through 8? What do you do with those? They don't bite. It's like they don't have to answer it because they choose to have sacrifices with a right heart and ignore all the passages which suggest that that is not his original intent, but they don't allow anybody to have the opposite view. Does that make sense?
Oh yeah, that makes perfect sense. It's a, if you think about it, I guess in one way of looking at it, if the animals have the same breath of life that we have, why would he command them to be killed? That's kind of an interesting question to me. I mean, if he puts the breath of life, same breath of life that he put in us, and gave it to the animals, why would he command you to kill them?
Or back to today's text, why would he command the congregation to kill people who did something that was against the law?
Yeah, it says do not murder.
Well, there's a lot of debate, obviously, on all of these points, and you can wade off into it and roll up the sleeves, and that's why we have a section on the Discord called what is it that Seth called it, where you have these discrepancies and you want to fight it. I forget the name of it, but anyway, clashing convictions, I think, is what he called it. And you select that category and you jump in the middle of it. But here's the deal: whatever the reason, whether one sees the sacrificial system as a violation of some ethical, issue, or whether it's something else altogether, beyond all of that, beyond the reasoning, the question is: did God command, allow, intend, desire? Those are the questions that I have. And I think the answer to that is no. I think that now, do I believe that in the ancient world that there were a lot of sacrifices that were going on? Yes. Ancient people loved to sacrifice people, virgins, animals, whatever, because they felt that appeased the gods, that they felt that with the shedding of blood, you could draw near to God. You're giving up something. How many times have I heard somebody say, well, because of sin, something's got to die. Something's got to die. And you're like, well, that's really not true. You say, no. It's part of the ancient, people always tell me, it's part of the ancient system of, and they go into all sorts of made up, make-believe stuff. But God forgives sin as a forgiving parent. Like you don't have, right now, if you said, I've really done some things and I want to get my life right with God, you don't need to kill anything. In fact, I would recommend you not. You just go to God and you lift up your hands, you get on your knees perhaps, maybe on your face, and you say, God, forgive me for doing these things in all your compassion, and please accept my humble repentance, and I will not act that way again. And guess what? According to the biblical text, you're good.
Yeah.
Now, but some others might say, yeah, but I think something needs to die. Well, for what? and so this is a very, this occurs in a lot of ancient texts as well. So we see this dichotomy, something's got to die versus God forgives as a parent. And I think that the text overwhelmingly supports the latter. I didn't mean to derail your ideas. Keep jumping in there. I'll drink some tea.
But just to answer Damon, he's having a cow on here. As far as if we believe Passover actually happened, if all those lambs were killed, there would have been none left. I mean, because especially if there's 2 million people like you're talking about.
He says he's having a lamb. He's not having a cow.
But I mean, it's if you read, like we read this morning in chapter 23, he only lists 3 festivals.
Yeah,
that's it. There's no Passover even mentioned. Just the Feast of Unleavened Bread. then you got the first fruits, and then of course you got the fall. But it's interesting that nothing else is mentioned, and there's supposed to be 7, but nothing else was mentioned in there. That's what I'm saying. The whole Passover thing, I can't say it happened. I can't say it didn't happen. None of us can. We do know it's celebrated every single year. And like I said before, until we find out anything different, sure, we'll still celebrate it.
Well, let me add something to the celebrated every year thing. So let's take the story of Passover. Now, assume that that Damon is having a lamb over Exodus 12. Now, Exodus 12 has certainly got signs of interpolation. It's certainly got some things that are in there that were added at a later point. Mm-hmm. And those are obvious. And I'm sure that Damon knows that as well. But let's assume for a minute that Exodus 12 and so forth is an accurate reflection of what happened when the children of Israel left. And, they did the blood and put it on the doorpost and to keep Jehovah from killing all the firstborn. You had to have the blood smeared on the door, and that's how God knew not to kill the babies. And if you look at Exodus 12 and you look at the story of Passover, you can't say that it was kept from that time all the way through, because the Bible doesn't say that. In fact, it was not kept at all. And that leads me to wonder, A, why did they know about this Passover that is supposedly goes back to the original Exodus? It's not mentioned. Like, first of all, there's 40 years in the wilderness, according to the text. You have the first Passover, Exodus 12. You have Numbers chapter 9, which is a second Passover. Then when we get to the book of Joshua, we get shocked. We get shocked. And why do we get shocked? Because we find out that Moses, the leader of the people, didn't circumcise anyone the whole time they were in the desert. You're like, what is going on here? Moses seems to have a problem with circumcision. Exodus chapter 4, God or the angel shows up and is going to kill somebody. It's kind of unclear who's going to get killed there. But there's a problem, and the problem is that Moses is avoiding this circumcision thing altogether. In fact, Deuteronomy doesn't know of any circumcision but the circumcision of heart. Mm-hmm. Now, you can't eat Passover unless you follow the priestly circumcision rite. Okay? Now, I'm not suggesting, look, I know there's a lot of good data that says circumcision is beneficial for health reasons, and so I'm not going there. I'm not getting into that. I'm not saying anything against that. However, what I am saying is you can't eat the Passover if you're not circumcised. So then Joshua has to circumcise 600,000 men, and then they eat the Passover for the first time since year 2 of the Exodus, is what it looks like. Mm-hmm. You say, well, you don't know that. Maybe they ate Passover every year and just didn't record it. All right, maybe. But those are people making guesses based on what the text doesn't say. I'm very strict with the text. So then, and I'll be quiet in a minute and let you talk again, my friends. But I kind of got on a soapbox here. So let me say, so then we read in the time of Josiah. Now, there's one other Passover, and that Passover is in the time of Hezekiah, supposedly. Hezekiah in chapter 30 of Chronicles has Hezekiah doing a second Passover, not the first. He does the second one, the Passover Shnei. And what is interesting about this is that then it doesn't happen again until his grandson, or great-grandson, when Josiah's reign comes about. And it says in Kings and Chronicles in that story that they didn't know what they were doing again. And so they kept the Passover, but it says very clearly that they didn't keep it since the days of Samuel or Judges. Now,
Mm-hmm.
and it even says that none of the kings of Israel kept it. So what I'm wondering is, was Passover introduced that late in the game? Now, before people throw tomatoes at the screen, hang on and listen to this. In Chronicles, when it talks about in great detail how they did the Passover, it says that they are to boil the Passover. But in Exodus 12, it says, listen, whatever you do, roast it over fire, but do not boil it. I mean, so what's going on there? So the details are wrong. They don't match. There are problems with the text. There's an avoidance to keep the text. They didn't keep the Passover. And then all of a sudden, in the year 622 BCE, depends on when you call the Exodus, but I mean, it's been hundreds of years. Now, what a lot of people do is they say, yeah, but there was a righteous remnant somewhere keeping the Passover. Well, guess what? The Bible writers don't say that. So why do we? So I'm willing to say that that we clearly have an evolution even in the festivals. Now, here's another thing. There's a conflation that happens in some texts between Pesach and unleavened bread. So were the two actually originally connected, or did that happen later? There's a lot to dig into in this, and I think you guys might have been hitting on some of that.
Well, something I ran across this morning, I've been off and on reading the Gospels of the Nazarenes.
Okay.
And which kind of has like all the books combined, all the Gospels combined into it. But it's interesting. There's one of the many times Yeshua was having it out with the scribes and the Pharisees. They were complaining to him about one of his disciples not washing his hands before he ate.
Yeah.
It was one of those kind of deals. It's interesting what he says. Well, has Moses commanded you to be clean and to keep your bodies clean and your vessels clean, but you have added things which oftentimes cannot be observed by everyone at all times and in all places. You won't find that in a regular Bible.
Yeah.
So that's interesting. And there's another one too that he talks about the law. In chapter 44, then shall the truth, which is the law, endure the contradiction of those who transgress it, for thus it has been, and thus it will be. But the time approaches when the things which they have hidden shall be revealed and made known, and the truth shall make free those which were bound. That's kind of what we're doing.
Yeah.
We're figuring out what's true, what's not true. Unfortunately, nobody's going to have the answer. So we just have to kind of go by gut feeling or what we feel like we're being led to accept or not accept or whatever.
Well,
I
go
think
ahead.
it's been like that for, since
Yeshua's day.
Yeah, since Yeshua was walking, probably before that.
Yeah. Well, I was at, very fundamentalist in my original approach, and, did everything to defend the whole Bible. Like, this is the truth, the whole truth, nothing but the truth. And then
it's infallible.
Yeah, and that was a good basis for me. It was a good foundation because it caused me to have to really think and challenge and pray, because I was really worried that if I made a mistake or who am I to challenge this? And I probably just don't understand. And maybe if I could read it in the original, and I get to study in Hebrew, and you continually put it on yourself that discrepancies or variations are in my head. It's not in the text. You have to know so that's the way I started. But, when I remember years ago when I said, I see a distinction between the teachings of Paul and Jesus. And that, as I know you guys know, that'd get you in a jam of trouble there.
Oh, yeah.
Bringing that up. And I did bring it up and got me in trouble. I've never worried about trouble too much. But nonetheless, And then I started saying, I see discrepancies between the New Testament and the Hebrew Bible. And so God, please, let me live long enough to work through this. I'm going to put the New Testament on a shelf, and I'm just going to focus on the Hebrew Bible. And then, I start noticing other things. Well, sooner or later, my decision was I either tell people the truth or I get out of this Bible teaching gig altogether. Like I am not going to do something or teach something because of sensibilities, because of, I'm going to be honest. And I think that is something we all ought to demand of our friends and our, I'm not saying pick fights with everybody, but I'm saying if somebody sets themselves up to teach, then they, by God, better, they ought to be honest in their approach to these texts. And look, I have been a fundamentalist and I enjoyed it. I'm no longer a fundamentalist, but I still love fundamentalism in some regard because I know what they're trying to do. They're trying to make sense out of every jot and tittle, and they're trying to make it all fit. But in the meantime, we have these glaring discrepancies. Again, if God needed the shedding of blood, now Christians have an answer for this, at least. Now, I don't agree with it, but their answer is, well, the reason you don't need sacrifices right now is because Jesus was that ultimate sacrifice, But that leaves everybody else out in the cold because for 2,000 years there's not been a sacrifice. But anyway, I think that Passover and some of these festivals, everything for me is on the table, meaning we have to look at everything fresh. We have to do it with respect and with prayer, but we have to look at it. And these festivals, we've got to look at those too. And we have to ask ourselves, why do they have differences between the different texts? Why is it that one text requires certain requirements for Passover and another text not? And why did it go hundreds and hundreds of years with no one keeping it?
Yeah. Well, you just got me thinking, talk about being a fundamentalist and everything. Yeah, because we were like this at one time too, that, the Bible's infallible.
Yeah.
If it's in there, it's true. And, we were like that at one time. But if you think about it, to have that view of the Bible is, I would consider it to be kind of lazy because you're not being challenged. If you think everything in there is truth, this, that, and the other, then where's the test? He said that he would be testing us. And, not only do I think that Paul is one humongous test, but I think that reading the Bible with his character in mind is also the test. If you read something that's like, that just doesn't sound like something the Father would do.
Yeah.
Well, maybe it's not. And I think that's just part of the test. But if you think the whole thing is infallible and it's the Word of God and everything, then there's no test.
Well, it's funny to me. It feels like I could tell this parable where a guy goes out to sow a field and he puts good seed out and he goes to bed. And while he was sleeping, some dirty, rotten scoundrel came and threw thorns and thistles in his good crops. Who would do such a thing? And when the story is told, you remember this story, obviously. I don't know. I can't remember it exactly, but it's sticking in my brain right now. And the idea is, well, what about, what do we do? Do we go pull those thorns up? And you're like, nope, you let them grow together until the harvest. Right? Well, we have true and false sayings and stories that are intermingled. And Jeremiah said it. Jeremiah called it out. Jeremiah says, who are we to say that we are wise? And the Torah of the Lord is with us when the lying pen of the scribes has made it a lie. Now look, that sets fundamentalist hair on fire. I mean, they don't like to hear that, and I understand why. But it now has become a mission for me to distinguish between true and false. And
Right.
and the only way to do that is, first step, recognize we have different stories. We have different stories. Either people saw God or they didn't see God. And it's not as easy as, well, the word in Hebrew is in vision, or blah, blah, blah. Either they saw something or they didn't see something. Either
Mm-hmm.
they ate with God or they didn't eat with God. Either they were told to kill animals and fling blood on people, or sacrifices weren't part of the story. Look, it can't be both. It can't be both. It's not possible for the God to say, I want your sacrifices, I desire your sacrifices. And then the same God to say, I don't want these. And it's not just about having your heart right. He says, I desire not sacrifice. I don't desire that. I love in Psalm 50, if God says, if I were hungry, would I ask you to make me something? It's like,
Mm-hmm.
no, I'm not going to ask you. Do I drink the blood of bulls and goats? Look, the ancient world loves this stuff.
Yeah.
And modern theologians love this stuff because it points out their theological types and shadows. But we're talking about a revolutionary faith, I believe, that Moses brought on the scene that challenged everything and turned the religious world on its head. And it was, you can approach God and you have some, here are some Devarim, 10 words that God spoke. You do these, there's a blessing, there's a curse. If you do them, you're blessed. If you don't, you're cursed. Hey, how hard is that?
She just showed me a verse from Malachi 3:6 where he says, I change not.
Yeah.
And church doesn't agree with that because they say, well, hey, he's changed.
Yeah.
And everything. And there's one church marquee that we saw a few months ago. It says, it's okay to change because the Lord did.
Wow.
Okay.
Yeah.
But
then you have the diet as well. You have Genesis 1:29 where he gave us the herbs of the field and the fruits of the trees to eat. And yet later on, he allows man to eat meat.
Yeah.
So he changed there too.
So, I mean, which one do you believe?
Yeah.
And then you also have the prophet saying that, in the New Jerusalem or whatever, that there will not be any, I mean, even the animals are not going to be eaten.
They will not hurt or destroy in all my holy mountain, I think is the way it puts it.
Yeah. There's a guy that we used to watch years ago, back when we were still going to church and everything. And he did a sermon on the contradictions in the Bible and was refuting every single contradiction, trying to explain it away.
Yeah.
And we bought it for a while. I mean, that's, why wouldn't we?
Yeah.
But after time, it's kind of like, man, the contradictions he listed, which there were probably a couple of dozen of them. Oh, it was more than that. But if you bring that up to him today, though, he'll liable to throw his microphone and his Bible at you, hit you in the head with it.
I saw it. Somebody sent me a note the other day, an email, and I didn't know this person, but they were upset with me, evidently, because I was pointing out supposed discrepancies in the Torah. And they said that there was a rabbi who was offering $10,000 to anyone who could find a single discrepancy. And I wrote the guy back. I said, quickly, send me this guy's information. I could use $10,000. I'm not going to lie.
Yeah.
But I mean, look, I'm not doing any of what I do for the sake of instigating a fight or hurting someone's faith. It's really about how do we get back at the truth? What is the origin of some of these ideas? That's what we really need to work on. And so I'm open to all those ideas. I I want to be honest to Moses, honest to God.
Right. I mean, that's what we're all trying to be.
Yeah.
But like I said, you're never going to find the answer because nobody knows it. You just have to go with what your heart says.
I think we're going to find out a lot more than people think. I think I think there and I think a lot of it really is solvable. In other words, if it were impossible, then it would be a futile effort to really engage in this, because it's just, well, you say this, I say this. You say this, I say. But there is a logical approach to this that is grounded in historical methodology, and I think that we can utilize that. We can involve archaeological discoveries. We can look at all sorts of things to discern veracity, and so I'm excited about what the future holds. And I know some people are a little bit anxious when it comes to things like this. But I'm really looking forward to working with this group because we've got such a group that's interested in all of this. So,
yeah, that's all I got.
That's some good stuff. Look, I tell you what, we're going to shortly, just in a moment, we're going to tell our YouTube audience goodbye. And if you are on the YouTube and you're part of our support at the Yachad, you got to just join us in the Zoom call. You don't have to turn your camera on if you don't want to, but I mean, look at me. So I've got my camera on. But anyway, get on the YouTube, the Zoom call, and the rest of you, we will see you next week. God bless. Have a beautiful week, and thanks for joining us.